1944, the Pacific Ocean burns with war. The skies above endless blue water are no longer silent. They roar with the thunder of engines and the scream of steel. Japan, once master of the air, had ruled with fearsome Zero fighters, nimble machines that danced in the sky with unmatched agility. To the Japanese pilots, American planes were slow, clumsy, and unworthy challengers. They laughed at the idea that a single-engine American fighter could ever challenge their supremacy, but laughter would soon give way to silence. Because across the ocean, in hangars gleaming under the Californian sun, a new predator was being born. Sleek, muscular, and engineered for war, the P-51 Mustang. At first it was dismissed, underestimated, even mocked. Yet when its long-range fuel tanks were fitted, when its powerful Rolls-Royce Merlin engine unleashed a scream across the heavens, everything changed. Suddenly American bombers could reach Japan and still have protection. Suddenly the hunters became the hunted. And suddenly the Japanese pilots, who once grinned in confidence, found themselves staring at the glinting wings of Mustangs diving from the sun. This was not just another airplane. It was a turning point, a machine that redefined the Pacific skies, and a legend that silenced laughter forever. The Pacific skies in the early years of World War II belonged to Japan. From Pearl Harbor to the jungles of the Philippines, the Mitsubishi A6M-0 was the symbol of Japanese air dominance, a machine that seemed untouchable. Lightweight, agile, and deadly, it danced in the sky like a predator with wings. American pilots feared it. Their slower, heavier aircraft were no match for its maneuverability. To challenge a Zero in a dogfight was to accept a death sentence. Even the bravest fighter pilots knew that once a Zero got on their tail, escape was almost impossible. Stories spread among Allied squadrons, men disappearing in smoke and fire after brief encounters with the sleek Japanese fighter. The Zero was not just an aircraft. It was an omen of defeat, and for years it carried Japan's air supremacy with ruthless efficiency. In Tokyo and across the islands of the Pacific, Japanese pilots spoke with pride, even arrogance, about their mount. They believed the Zero was more than a machine. It was proof of Japanese engineering genius, an extension of their warrior spirit. In the culture of the Imperial Japanese Navy, where honor and superiority were deeply woven into every mission, the idea that an American plane could rival the Zero was laughable. When whispers of a new American fighter reached Japanese ears, they shrugged it off. The reports described a sleek machine called the Mustang. But to the Japanese, American technology was heavy, clumsy, and soulless. They laughed. They mocked. To them, the Mustang was just another doomed attempt to reach their level of mastery, but laughter is often the prelude to shock. The P-51 Mustang was born not in the halls of military tradition, but in the urgency of war. At first, even the Americans were unsure of it. Early versions lacked the punch to compete with the best Axis fighters. Yet engineers and visionaries were relentless. They reimagined the Mustang not as a mere aircraft, but as a predator of the skies. When the British fitted it with the Rolls-Royce Merlin engine, everything changed. Suddenly the Mustang had speed that tore through the air like a thunderbolt, a climb rate that reached into the heavens, and firepower that shredded anything in its path. The P-51 had been underestimated by friend and foe alike, but its true potential was about to erupt across the Pacific skies. For Japanese pilots, the first encounters with the P-51 were dismissive. They approached with grins of confidence, certain they would dance around this new machine as they had so many others. Dogfights began as they always had, with Zeros twisting and turning in impossibly tight circles, their lightweight frames slicing through the air. But then, something was different. The Mustang did not falter. It did not lag behind. It did not tumble into the sea as so many American planes had before. Instead, it soared higher, faster, stronger. When the Zero banked, the Mustang climbed. When the Zero turned, the Mustang dove. And when the Zero's guns sought their mark, The Mustang unleashed its 650 caliber Brownings with devastating accuracy, ripping through the fragile skin of the Japanese fighter like paper. Shock began to ripple through Japanese squadrons. The laughter that once filled their ready rooms before missions grew quiet. Reports came back of entire formations of Zeros falling in flames, unable to outrun or outfight the new American machine. Pilots who once spoke with arrogance now returned with haunted eyes, whispering of a predator that came from the clouds and struck with merciless speed. The P-51 was rewriting the rules of aerial combat. The hunters had become the hunted. What made the Mustang so deadly was not just its speed, but its balance. It combined agility with endurance, firepower with finesse. It was everything the Zero was not. Where the Zero sacrificed armor for maneuverability, the Mustang endured hits and kept fighting. Where the Zero's limited fuel range confined it to short missions, the Mustang roamed freely, carrying auxiliary tanks that gave it reach across oceans. Where the Zero relied on surprise and agility, the Mustang relied on overwhelming power. In every category, the P-51 began to erase the Zero's dominance, turning once feared encounters into lopsided battles. For Japanese pilots, there was no easy answer. Their beloved Zero, once a symbol of invincibility, was now exposed as fragile and outdated. The Mustang could outrun it, outclimb it, and outgun it. Worse, the Mustang gave American pilots something they had never truly possessed in the Pacific skies: confidence. No longer did they fly with dread, waiting for the lethal shadow of the Zero. Now they flew with a predator of their own, and it was Japan's turn to feel the fear. In every dogfight, in every mission, the psychological tide turned. Laughter gave way to silence, and silence gave way to despair. In the skies above the Pacific, battles stretched from horizon to horizon. Blue seas reflected the fiery glow of falling wreckage, while the clouds carried the echoes of roaring engines and thunderous gunfire. The P-51 Mustang sliced through it all, its silver body gleaming under the sun, its propeller a blur of fury. To the Japanese, it was not just a plane. It was a storm, an unstoppable force that shattered their illusions of superiority. What began with mockery ended with the bitter realization that the Zero's reign was over. The transformation was brutal. Squadrons that once launched with pride now hesitated at the thought of facing the Mustang. Veterans who had laughed at its arrival now spoke of it in grim tones, acknowledging its power with reluctant respect. For Japan, the age of the Zero had ended not with honor, but with fire, wreckage, and the roar of a machine they once dismissed as a joke. The Mustang had silenced their laughter in the most brutal way possible, by ruling the skies they once claimed as their own. The true terror of the P-51 Mustang was not only its speed or its firepower, it was its reach. For years, one of Japan's greatest advantages was geography. The Pacific Ocean was vast, endless, and unforgiving. American aircraft, no matter how fast, were tethered by their limited range. Their bombers could not strike deep into Japanese territory without flying unescorted, vulnerable to the Zero's razor-sharp teeth. For the Japanese, this was their comfort, their shield. They believed that the ocean itself would defend them, that American planes would never find the strength to cross its endless horizon. But then came the Mustang, fitted with auxiliary fuel tanks that transformed it from a regional fighter into a transoceanic predator. Suddenly, the distance that once protected Japan became meaningless. Suddenly, American bombers could soar across the Pacific, accompanied not by fear, but by an escort of Mustangs that would stay with them to the target and back again. The long-range Mustang was more than a fighter. It was a promise, a declaration that nowhere was safe, not even the skies above Tokyo. Imagine being a Japanese pilot in those days. At dawn, you are briefed that American bombers are approaching, as they have before. You expect, as always, that your Zeros will pounce on the lumbering formations, tear them apart, and scatter them before they can drop their payloads. You climb into your cockpit with the same ritual confidence. But as you rise into the thin blue air, you see something different. The bombers are not alone. Sleek silver shapes fly beside them, above them, and behind them. They are Mustangs, their wings glinting like blades in the morning sun. And they do not break away when the bombers near their maximum range. They stay. They stay all the way to Japan itself. This realization was devastating. The defensive perimeter Japan had relied on was crumbling not by sea, but by sky. The Mustang had changed the rules of war. American B-29 superfortresses, massive and relentless, could now unleash destruction upon Japanese cities with escort fighters at their side. The Zero, once a terror to bomber crews, now found itself hunted before it could even close the distance. In the chaos of the sky, squadrons of Mustangs would tear through Japanese defenders, scattering them before the bombers released their deadly cargo. For the Japanese, the war in the air turned from offense to desperate survival. The psychological toll was as severe as the physical one. Japanese pilots, who once viewed the ocean as their ally, now saw it as meaningless. There was no horizon safe from the Mustang's reach, no stronghold too distant, no city too sacred. The Empire of Japan, once confident that its skies were secure, was now vulnerable at its very heart. Mustangs soared over the homeland itself, a sight that Japanese citizens had never imagined possible. Factories, railroads, and military installations burned, while American bombers and their escorts returned unscathed, shielded by the lethal guardianship of the Mustang. The silence that once followed Japanese laughter grew heavier with every mission. The young men who took to the skies no longer carried the arrogance of their predecessors. They flew, knowing they faced not only the bombers, but the merciless shadow of the Mustang. And unlike the fragile Zero, the Mustang could withstand punishment and keep fighting. Time after time, Japanese defenders fell in flames while the Mustangs returned to base. Their pilots weary but alive, every aspect of Japanese air strategy began to collapse. The tactics that once worked, hit-and-run attacks, surprise dives, swarming formations, now crumbled against the speed and endurance of the Mustang. Even kamikaze pilots, willing to sacrifice their lives, found themselves intercepted before they could reach their targets. The P-51's presence was suffocating, a constant reminder that Japan no longer controlled its own skies. The laughter of the early war years was now a distant echo, replaced by grim silence in briefing rooms. Where survival, not victory, was the unspoken hope, the Mustang's endurance reshaped the very map of the war. What once seemed unreachable became a target. The Mariana Islands, Okinawa, Iwo Jima, stepping stones of fire that brought American forces closer to Japan, were all secured under the umbrella of Mustang escorts. Each conquest tightened the noose around the Japanese homeland. Each new base meant more sorties, more destruction, more reminders that the Empire's once mighty air arm had been broken. For the Japanese pilot climbing into his Zero, the war no longer felt like destiny. It felt like doom. The sight of Mustangs escorting bombers all the way to Japan carried with it an undeniable message. This was not just a war of machines, but of will. America had found the key to breaking the Empire's shield, and Japan's defenders were powerless to stop it. The skies, once a source of national pride and superiority, had become a graveyard for the men who had once mocked their enemies. What they dismissed as impossible had become the new reality. And in that reality, the Mustang reigned supreme. The laughter of Japanese pilots at the sight of the P-51 had long since died. What replaced it was silence, fear, and the haunting knowledge that the very skies they once commanded now belonged to another. The Mustang was not simply an aircraft, it was a symbol of inevitability, of a tide that could not be turned back. It escorted the bombers that reduced Japanese cities to ashes, and with every mission it carved deeper into the heart of an empire that had once believed itself untouchable. The P-51 Mustang was more than a machine of war. It was a symbol, a revelation that transformed the Pacific skies from a Japanese sanctuary into an American battlefield. For years, the Japanese had built their identity upon dominance in the air. The Zero was not just a fighter, It was their pride, their assurance that the spirit of the samurai lived on in the modern world. Every victory in those early days of the war reinforced the belief that their superiority was unshakable. But the arrival of the Mustang shattered that illusion. It did not simply beat the Zero, it humiliated it, stripping away the myths of invincibility and replacing them with the harsh reality of innovation and industrial might. The Zero had been crafted with elegance, with a focus on agility and grace. It reflected the Japanese philosophy of warfare, precision, daring, and sacrifice. Yet that very philosophy became its undoing. The Mustang represented the opposite. It was not a fragile dancer in the sky, it was a predator, built to endure, built to dominate. Its roar announced not finesse, but overwhelming presence. Its silhouette cutting through the clouds was a warning that the rules had changed, that the days of delicate duels between planes were gone. War was no longer about who could turn tighter or dive quicker. War was now about who could outlast, overpower, and overwhelm. The Japanese pilots who once mocked the Mustang soon found themselves trapped in a nightmare of their own arrogance. Dogfights that once favored their nimble Zeros now ended in streaks of fire, as Mustangs dove from the sun, shredding wings and fuselages in bursts of machine gun fire. The shock was not only physical but spiritual. To be defeated by numbers was one thing, but to be outflown, outgunned and outclassed by a machine they had laughed at was something else entirely. Every encounter was a painful reminder of their mistake. The laughter that had once echoed in their ready rooms now existed only as a ghost, a bitter memory of a confidence that had vanished into smoke. The Mustang's arrival also carried psychological weight far beyond the battlefield. For American pilots, it meant hope, survival, and victory. Men who had once gone into the sky with dread now carried with them the pride of flying the most feared fighter of the war. The Mustang gave them courage, not just to fight, but to dominate. Every mission was a statement to their enemies that the balance had shifted. For the Japanese, the knowledge that the Americans now flew with such confidence was crushing. An Air Force is not just about machines, it is about morale. And with every Mustang victory, Japanese morale crumbled further. What made the Mustang legendary was not just the destruction it caused, but the inevitability it carried. Japanese pilots entered the skies, knowing they faced an opponent they could not defeat. Their skills, their bravery, their years of training all seemed meaningless when confronted with the Mustang's power. Some fought anyway, driven by duty and honor, but even in their courage lay despair. For they knew the truth. The war in the air was already lost. Each mission was not a chance at victory, but a delay of the inevitable. The sound of the Mustang's engine overhead became a grim soundtrack to their downfall. As the war dragged on, the Zero's legacy faded into smoke. Its legend of invincibility collapsed under the weight of Mustang victories. The P-51 had not only crushed a fighter plane, it had crushed an idea, the belief that Japan could rule the skies. This was the true legacy of the Mustang. It turned laughter into silence, pride into resignation, and dominance into defeat. The Mustang became the hunter of hunters, a machine that carried with it the momentum of a nation's industry, the determination of its pilots, and the cold inevitability of innovation triumphing over tradition. In the final months of the war, the Mustang's presence was everywhere. Over the islands, over the seas, even over the burning cities of Japan itself, its silhouette filled the skies. For the Japanese people, its sight was a reminder that their empire was crumbling. For their pilots, it was the shadow of defeat itself, always waiting, always ready, always superior. The same men who once dismissed it as a clumsy American experiment now spoke of it with a mixture of fear and reluctant awe. It was no longer just an aircraft, it was the hand of fate, sealing the end of their air supremacy. The story of the P-51 Mustang in the Pacific is not just about technology or tactics. It is about the fragility of arrogance. It is about how quickly confidence can collapse when faced with relentless innovation. The Japanese pilots who once laughed at the Mustang never imagined that their laughter would become a tragic echo, drowned out by the roar of a machine they had underestimated. And in that silence, in that bitter realization, lies the true legacy of the P-51 Mustang, not just victory, but transformation. It ruled the Pacific skies not only with fire and steel, but with the undeniable truth that the age of the Zero was gone forever.